Hi, Anthony back with my shop supervisor, Bob Barker, and we recently splurged on this Festool Sander. So we wanted to talk about the decision process, whether or not going for a high-end tool like this was right for us and whether or not it might be right for you. So let's get into it. All right, so the first thing that I did want to mention to my fellow DIYers especially is if a high-end tool like this is not in your budget, don't stress. You're going to get your project done and it's going to look great. However, if you are in the market for an upgrade to a high-end sander, let's talk about, is it actually worth your money? Now, when I was first considering this, one thing that really stuck with me is I heard someone say, and I wish I could give them credit, I don't remember who it was, that sometimes DIYers, hobbyists, may actually even benefit more from these high-end tools like the Festool Sander than some of the professionals would as far as the quality of their work. Because with the professionals, they have multiple years, decades of experience, and their skill is much more refined. So they're going to be able to compensate for an inferior tool in their outcome and with their efficiency. So yes, it's going to be great use for them, but they can get around it a little bit easier. For the average, DIYer, hobbyist, you can get to that good outcome, but it's just going to take us a little bit longer. So something like this can actually increase your speed and efficiency, and also you can get a little bit more precision for your end finished product. So it actually may be a very viable thing for people like me, even though this is not for my everyday job. So for many, many years, this has been my primary sander. Now, I know it's definitely not the most optimal unit to have as your primary sander, but of course, we all have to decide where to best spend our money, and for a while, I wanted to kind of round out the different tools that I had, and once I got to a nicer spot, then I felt a little bit more comfortable upgrading existing tools. But it's done the job for a long time, and you'll see on my prior videos me busting this thing out whenever I'm doing sanding of all my different projects. But now it was time to upgrade. So before I get into the real specifics of whether or not I think this is worth the money or if it's going to be worth the money to you, I want to talk about what drew me to this particular model in the first place. So this is the Festool ETS EC 155. And there's a few reasons I went with this. First, just the brand Festool itself. They're known for quality products, albeit expensive, and their sanders are excellent sanders. You'll be hard-pressed to find anybody who says anything bad about these sanders other than the price of them. And the reason why I went with Festool over, say, like Mirka or another high-end brand is I also got the dust extractor along with this one, and there's other tools that I plan on getting in the future, and so I figured it'd just be simpler just to have things be compatible with each other and just make it a little bit easier and more streamlined. Now, for this particular model of Festool, I went with the 150 over the 125 because I wanted the 6-inch sanding disc as opposed to the 5, just to help increase speed and efficiency. And then I went with the 5 over the 3 because for the 5 it has a little bit of larger movement in this pad as opposed to the 3, so that makes it supposedly more aggressive and remove material quicker, so it kind of helps with the speed and efficiency. The 3 is supposed to be a little bit of a finer finish. I figure in the end for me, this is still going to do just as good as a job as that would. So with this particular sander, I was really drawn to the ergonomics of it. It's kind of low profile, very comfortable in your hand, easily adjustable for the speed. You got a little knob here. I've played around with this a fair amount, and I find that I'm drawn to the higher speeds on this more so than the lower ends, but it's nice to have that adjustment. And one huge thing with this is the vibration is pretty minimal. I can use this sander for a very long time and not really feel any discomfort in my hand. However, like when I use this one, and the same thing for a lot of the other sanders, including the mid-range ones, is you get so much vibration that after a while your hand starts to tingle, it kind of goes numb, it's just uncomfortable, and you just need to take breaks. And that's what I've been doing for many years, is when I have a project, take some breaks, and wait till my hand feels better, then go back, sand some more, and just kind of repeating that process. With this one, I found that I can do much longer sanding sessions and still haven't really run into any significant discomfort. And the other thing that was really important to me with this is the dust collection. That's been an issue for me for quite some time, and I've really been wanting to improve and work on that. And the dust collection on this, and just like most Festools, it's amazing. And another point that I did want to bring up is, this is kind of minor for a lot of people, but for me it actually did matter some. The time for this sanding disc to come to a stop after you use it is really fast. So when I turned it on, as soon as I turn it off, I can set it right down, it's already stopped by the time I get to my table. With my old sander, when I turn this thing on, turn it off, and I have to wait, and then I can sand it down. Yeah, it's just a few seconds, but it can get annoying, and there's other times where I'm distracted. I set it down, and then it kind of jumps all over the table. Sometimes, like, I can mess up a piece if I don't watch where I put it, or, can fall off, damage the unit itself. So it's a minor point, but it actually does make a significant difference for me. So those are the considerations that brought me to that specific tool. However, what brought me to deciding to go for the high-end sander? So when we go through the main categories that of course are all interrelated, you're talking about time, money, the outcome of the product, the dust collection and cleanup afterwards, the ergonomics and use, and your just general comfort and enjoyment of it. One of the biggest ones really is the time. With my old sander, I've used that thing so much and I'm so used to it, I can get a pretty good product out of it, but it just takes time. And it's hard for a lot of people to have that patience. I see a lot of people, they just want to hurry up and rush through a project. And to be honest, I don't think woodworking works best that way. Realistically, things take time, and you should be willing to take the time to do the job right and get a good product. If you're going to rush through it, unless you're just one of the best around, you're just going to have not as a good outcome as you could have if you would have just taken your time. But however, tools like this can really increase the amount of time that it takes to do the job. And I've noticed there's a significant time savings in my old sander versus my new one. And so I did some quick testing just to see actual numbers and see what the difference is. Now, of course, this is not necessarily a fair test because we're going from a low end to a high end sanders, but it just gives a general idea of the improvements that you can get.
So I grabbed this piece of oak and just put a piece of tape right there in the dead center. Then we got our pencil and just drew some lines on each side. And basically we're just gonna sand through that until the lines are gone. So on the first one, we're using my old sander with 120 grit sandpaper and just keep on going across it until we can't see any of those lines. And it took 33 seconds with this one. Then I used the same 120 grit sandpaper, although it is a different brand, for the Festool, and that took 13 seconds. Then we went up to 180 grit, and that took 14 seconds with the Festool. And with my old sander, when I did the 180 grit, initially the time wasn't too bad, but then I went back and realized there was a bunch of swirl marks, so I had to do a little bit more, and it ended up being a total of 25 seconds.
So the next category is going to be the quality of the product. Now, as you saw in the speed test, I ended up having to go back to clean up some swirl marks that I got with my old sander. Now, with the Festool, it's much more rare for me to have that happen and have to clean up. So it is much easier to get a good finished product. And realistically, you're never gonna catch all the little mistakes. So I do think by using this particular sander, you will get a better outcome. Of course, unless you're the most patient and diligent person in the world, then you can probably still get the same outcome. It's just gonna take significantly more time. So the next category is dust collection and cleanup. And that's something that we really all should take into consideration because you want to protect your health. With my old sander, I always have to use a respirator. Otherwise, I'm just going to be inhaling a storm of dust like the whole time. With this new one, it's still advisable to do it, but the amount of dust that I get in the air and all over is infinitely better. I can do a whole project with this Festool sander and come out clean. However, when I use my old sander, I kind of look like this. So then that adds time for cleaning myself up as well as cleaning up the shop around me. Then another big consideration was my enjoyment of the process. Now with my old sander, it was always a pain, and to be honest, I really disliked doing it. It was just one of those things that you have to do. And I think the biggest part of that is the amount of time it took and the discomfort from using the sander. So far, with the Festool, I've actually enjoyed and have been looking forward to using the sander. I mean, maybe just because I like tools, but it's a much more enjoyable process. I don't find myself dreading it. And I think that's really important, especially since this is a hobby and not necessarily a job. So this is something that I don't have to do, but I want to do. So I want to keep myself wanting to do it. And I found that this really just enhances that. So we've gone over a lot of the positives that upgrading to this type of tool can bring you. Is there any negatives? So far, I've really only found 2 things that are slight negatives. One is more of a personal thing because I've been using this sander for so long. I really got used to the work that I had to put into this thing and how I had to alter my style to get a good quality finish, that once I moved over to this one, I really had to adjust how I sand. So it was a little bit of a learning curve on how to use this sander. For one, I had to put actually a decent amount of downward pressure on this one, and I had to hold it in certain angles to get a little bit more off because it doesn't remove nearly as much material as this one. So once I started using this, I ruined the first piece that I was using. It was a small piece, and I found it was so aggressive that it just ended up rounding over the whole thing because it was like hitting on the edges. Now, I adjusted my technique and that's not an issue anymore, and I also got this harder pad to go along with it, so once I'm on the edges it doesn't sink in as much, so that kind of helps keep a flat surface a little bit better. So that was just a quick and temporary thing, but it is something to keep in mind if you're using a low-end thing like I am and you're used to it. Make sure you use some scrap pieces and practice with this and not with your actual project. The other thing that I have noticed with this one is I can't do the edges like I did with this. Because it's so big, I can still do small pieces, but for the actual edges of boards, I found it's kind of impossible for me, at least by hand, to keep this from digging into the sides and just rounding over that whole edge. So my solution is going to be either using this, or you can get like edge guides that will help keep these things 90 degrees to it. But most likely for now, I'll probably just keep on using this to hit up the edge and maybe consider something like that in the future. In the end, I am very happy with this and it is absolutely worth the money for me. And the reason being is I do a lot of projects. This may not be my primary job, but I use it enough where the time savings, the efficiency, the increased enjoyment of using this makes a significant difference to me, and I think that's worth it. And if you're gonna splurge on a high-end tool, I really do think a sander should be one of your first considerations, especially since it's an aspect of woodworking that most people don't enjoy particularly much. And so if you can enhance anything, you might as well enhance the things that are the least fun to you. That way it'll improve your overall enjoyment of the projects. I also wanted to mention that this discussion is more geared towards the DIYer or the hobbyist. If you're a professional, then I think it's a much simpler decision. Anything that increases your efficiency and output is going to increase your income and is definitely worth it. So I think for professionals, these type of upgrades is very worth it and actually very important to do. But of course, there's a lot more to consider if you're more of a DIY or a hobbyist like me. So once we talked about all those different aspects of why this might be a good upgrade for us, the shop supervisor did approve it and we went with this and we couldn't be happier. I think for me, this was a great upgrade, and I hope this discussion kind of helps you think about reasons why it might be the right one for you. So we'll see you guys in the next video.